The morning the storm rolled across Silverpine Lake, the water looked like brushed steel, flat, cold, and reflecting a sky the color of wet concrete. I remember because I'd woken up early to prepare for a meeting that could decide the future of my property, and possibly the future of the entire Silverpine Shores Homeowners Association. The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years earlier, I had purchased the old lake cabin at the north edge of the community. It was quiet, rustic, and technically outside HOA jurisdiction, but close enough that they constantly tried to pretend otherwise. From the moment I moved in, the association treated me like a problem they intended to solve permanently. At the center of that mission was Barbara Hensley, president of the HOA, self-appointed guardian of community harmony, and a woman who believed authority was something you seized, not something you earned. Barbara had fined me for everything from dock aesthetic violations to unauthorized canoe coloration. She once tried to charge me for reflective water disturbance after I used a small motorboat. But today, I wasn't thinking about Barbara. Today, I was hosting the state attorney general. And no, this wasn't some friendly visit. For months, I'd been documenting irregularities within the HOA, questionable fines, unauthorized land claims, and a pattern of intimidation toward homeowners who resisted. Several residents had quietly shared stories. Most were too afraid to go public. I wasn't, so I filed a formal complaint with the state office. To my surprise, they responded. Which is how I found myself in my kitchen, pouring coffee for Attorney General Daniel Reeves, a tall, composed man with the calm presence of someone used to walking into storms without flinching. He stood near the window, reviewing documents I had compiled. "This is thorough," he said, flipping a page. "Property boundary manipulations, selective enforcement, intimidation tactics. If verified, this is significant." "I assumed you'd want to see the location firsthand," I replied. "I did," he said simply. We sat at the dining table overlooking the lake. Rain tapped against the windows in steady rhythm. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the moment before a fuse burned down. And then the front door exploded open. Not knocked, not pushed, exploded. Barbara stormed in like she owned the building. Behind her were 2 members of the HOA Compliance Committee, clipboard people who lived for enforcement notices. Her eyes locked on me instantly. "There you are," she snapped. "I warned you about unauthorized gatherings. You do not have permission to host meetings within community oversight zones." I stood slowly. "Barbara, this is private property." She waved dismissively and marched further inside. "Private property within visual range of HOA governance is subject to compliance review." She stopped mid-stride. That's when she noticed the man at the table. Daniel Reeves looked up calmly, coffee cup in hand. He didn't stand. He didn't react. He simply observed. Barbara frowned. "And who are you supposed to be?" He set the cup down with quiet precision. "My name is Daniel Reeves." She crossed her arms. "Are you aware this property is under investigation for multiple violations?" "Yes," he said evenly. "I am." Her tone sharpened. "Then you should leave. This is an official HOA enforcement inspection." The room went silent except for rain against glass. Reeves folded his hands on the table. "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Barbara stepped forward, irritation morphing into anger. "You cannot obstruct an HOA official." Reeves reached into his jacket pocket and placed a leather identification wallet on the table. He opened it slowly. The gold seal inside caught the dim morning light. Barbara leaned in, her face drained of color. "You," she stammered. "Yes," he said calmly. "I am the state attorney general. And this meeting is part of an active investigation." For the first time since I'd known her, Barbara had no words. She looked at me, then back at him. This is highly irregular," she managed. Reeves nodded slightly. "So are unauthorized entries into private residences." She swallowed hard. "We were conducting a compliance check." "With no warrant," he replied. "No notice. And no jurisdiction." One of her committee members shifted nervously. The other stared at the floor. Barbara tried to recover her authority. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "This community operates under binding governance rules." Reeves slid a document across the table. "I do understand," he said. "Which is why we're reviewing allegations that those rules have been used to unlawfully seize property, impose fraudulent penalties, and intimidate residents." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Reeves continued, voice still measured. We are also reviewing claims that WA leadership knowingly altered property boundary records. The rain intensified outside, as if punctuating the moment. Barbara's composure cracked. That is absurd, she said weakly. Reeves leaned back in his chair. Then I suggest you explain why multiple filings list community expansion claims beyond legal survey limits. Silence filled the cabin like thick fog. She glanced at the door, an instinctive search for escape. But there was none. For months, she had walked into people's homes uninvited, wielding authority like a weapon. Today, she had walked into a legal investigation. And she had done it voluntarily. Reeves turned slightly toward me. Mr. Carter, he said, would you mind documenting this entry for the record? I nodded and picked up my phone. Barbara raised a trembling hand. There's no need for that. There is, Reeves said gently. Minutes later, local law enforcement arrived, not because I called them, but because the Attorney General's office had scheduled oversight presence for the meeting. 2 officers entered respectfully. Barbara's confidence evaporated entirely. This is a misunderstanding, she insisted. We were protecting community interests. One officer glanced at Reeves. He spoke quietly but firmly. Ma'am, you'll need to step outside. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, Barbara Hensley looked small. As she was escorted out, she turned once more toward me. Her expression wasn't anger, it was disbelief, because she had always assumed power belonged to whoever claimed it loudest. She had never imagined walking into a room where authority didn't bow to her. The door closed behind her. The cabin grew quiet again. Reeves exhaled slowly and looked at me. Well, he said, that was unexpectedly efficient. I allowed myself a small smile. She does have a habit of making dramatic entrances. He gathered the documents neatly. What you documented here matters, he said. Most people endure. Few record. Even fewer report. Outside, the storm began to pass. Light filtered through the clouds, touching the lake with silver streaks. Over the following weeks, investigations widened. Financial records were audited. Property claims were reviewed. Dozens of residents came forward once they realized enforcement power had limits. Eventually, the results were made public. The WA leadership was dissolved pending restructuring. Several fines were ruled invalid. Boundary expansions were revoked. And Barbara Hensley resigned before formal proceedings concluded. The lake cabin remained quiet after that. Peaceful again. Sometimes, when I sit on the dock at sunset, I think about that morning. Power doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits calmly at a kitchen table, sipping coffee, waiting for truth to walk through the door uninvited.